from the time that we're born or really gestating, we are meant for connection. We are created as human beings to be delighted in and connected to or attuned to. And without it, we can't be a human. I mean, we're made for that. Trauma is a distressing event in our life that is distressing enough that we become so overwhelmed in that moment that we can't digest it. Even if he's relapsing, digest it. Can I still feel like the world isn't falling apart? How do I be resilient to relapse? And that only comes from examining your sense of self and your own sense of value and worth.
Dear listeners, if you are into trivia, of which no one really cares about, Chris, what was going to be the original name of this podcast?
Oh, that you're making me go back almost a year now. What was going to be?
It starts with the topic that we're talking about today.
Trauma.
Drama.
Trauma Drama Mamas.
Trauma Drama Mama. I still have the email.
Okay.
Available, which I do not use, and I'm quite honestly not even quite sure how to get rid of at this point. But Trauma Drama Mamas was the original
that's right.
name of our podcast that we had talked about, which I still sort of low-key
we still have
love.
We still have an Instagram for that, right. And
which at this point probably has about the same amount of content on it as our current Instagram, because we're both so. Actually, you're really good at the Instagram stuff, in my mind, and so I give you all the credit for any social media presence that we have.
Oh, thank you.
So
it's a lot, so we're learning.
Well, we're not talking about drama and we're not talking about mama. However, we are talking about trauma today on the podcast with our guest Debby Flanagan, who is a life coach and a clinician at Pure Desire Ministries. And I was very pleased with the content that we came out with today. I thought it was very helpful. What thoughts did you have today?
Oh, I just thought it was so fundamental. Such a fundamental topic. We're talking about betrayal trauma. We're betrayal recovery coaches, and it was just such a good going back to basics topic and conversation, defining what trauma is, talking about how to recover from it, how to spot it in ourselves, and some great key takeaways about methods to overcome and heal from trauma. It was very equipping.
I thought so too.
A great conversation.
Yeah, understanding that trauma really comes from a concept called rupture repair, and throwing that in the context of our recovery journey as well. I thought Debby did an excellent job.
She sure did. And she did mention a couple other topics that she loves to talk about, which is boundary work and also sex. So we're going to have her back on probably at least 2 more times to hear her heart and her. She's so highly educated and well-informed. And so we're going to definitely have her back a few more times to talk about those 2 topics. So she had some great offerings. It's just so amazing how there is no arrival. It really is a journey. We're always learning. We're always growing. We're always adding to, connecting the dots. Definitely. Yeah. And today's episode was definitely one of those situations.
Definitely. Yeah. So with that, enjoy today's podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Betrayal Recovery Transformation Podcast. This is your place to reclaim your life after betrayal. And I'm your host, Chris Rocha, and I'm here with my dear friend and co-host, Jen Howie. Hi, Jen.
I think that's the first time you've called me dear friend in your opener.
I try to switch things up a little bit, keep it fresh.
I'll take it. Hello. Yes, this is Jen Howie, and with my dear friend, Chris Rocha, and with also another dear friend who is our guest today. Not only is she a dear friend, but she was my very first clinician when Dan and I were going through our healing process. So for me, this is kind of a full circle episode. We are
talking precious moments.
Yeah. We are talking about trauma which I am so grateful to have had our guest, who is Debby Flanagan, today on the podcast. Like I said, she's a clinician. She's a life coach. She's a pastoral sex addiction professional. And I'll let her fill in a little bit more about how many years that she's had. I'm not sure, Debby. We'll ask this question in just a moment, but I think maybe Dan and I might have been your first clients, or maybe one of your first clients.
I was wondering if I messed you guys up or not.
Well, I don't know. That remains to be seen. So with that, Debby Flanagan, dear friend, cherished clinician, life coach, and professional, welcome to the podcast. Could you introduce yourself a little bit more than I did, and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, yes. So I have been in the healing field, and I entered into the healing field through the area of love addiction very early on in 1994. So it's been about 30 years or so that at our church we started in a healing ministry where Diane Roberts did, and that's how far back I go, even with the concept of sex and love addiction. And of course, then women were saying, we were incorporating the women because of the betrayal trauma, and these couples wanted to stay together and work it through. So we were developing and using all the tools. 30 years ago, there wasn't a lot of resources for women. And then, of course, you had church. The church was sort of like, well, you just need to work it out. We don't want to talk about sex. We don't want to talk about those things. So luckily, I was trained up under people who were comfortable with talking about sex. So that's how far back I go. And then later on, I was working at the church, and then my husband, Harry, he was working at the church as well. But when Pastor Ted moved out of the pastorate and into founding the Pure Desire Ministry as a nonprofit, Harry went with him to counsel there. And so, and our pattern is to counsel couples together. And that has been one of our strengths, I think, in this field, because most of, as you know, a lot of clinicians, a lot of training say you do individual and then you do couples, because it's, and we do a fair amount of individual as well, but for the most part, our client is the couple. And so we're always constantly working on that. But I've done I was involved with the original CSAT training. But then I got my pastoral license and became a PSAP. And so I don't have that, that 4-year therapeutic therapy license. But I have got so many other certifications. I love coaching. I love that aspect of asking questions, and I love getting to know people that way and getting to know what makes them click, and asking them those poignant questions that help them to think through what choices can I make? I love talking about boundaries, because a lot of times those are misunderstood. I love talking about women in sex addiction as well. I think that's a field that is sort of coming into a lot of recovery work for that, and recognizing with the betrayal trauma, just really how deep betrayal goes. It's not just, I got betrayed in my marriage. So when I help and work with women, I like to look a little deeper.
Yeah. Thanks, Debby. So just to clarify for our listeners, Debby just referred to Ted and Diane Roberts, who are the founders of a ministry called Pure Desire International. They're fantastic. Jen and I both did our healing work through that ministry. And the ministry was founded or started in a church called East Hill, right? In the Gresham, Oregon area. So just giving a little context for our listeners. So today we are going to talk about another one of your favorite topics, Debby, which is trauma in general. And oh my gosh, that's our podcast is called the Betrayal Recovery Transformation Podcast, and it's all things betrayal, all things recovery, all things transformation. And so the betrayal topic fits right into that first part, the trauma topic fits right into that first part, because we are betrayal recovery coaches. All three of us are. And so let's just dive into trauma. I had an experience recently with someone who said, "You're a betrayal trauma coach? That doesn't make sense. Trauma is something that happens when you go to war. PTSD is something you get when you've been in the trenches and people are shooting at you and you're fearing for your life. Betrayal's not a trauma." And I just went, oh boy, there's some learning to be done here, because it sure is a
Yeah.
trauma, and it sure does have effects on
Mhm.
our bodies and our minds and
Mhm.
relationships, and the PTSD is real. So,
It is
um,
real.
to start off, Debbie, could you explain what trauma is and how does
Mhm.
trauma affect our brains and our bodies?
Oh boy. Okay, so trauma, I mean, clinically, you can say trauma is a distressing event in our life that is distressing enough that we become overwhelmed and so overwhelmed in that moment that we can't digest it.
Mm.
So that could be and some of it goes back to childhood, some of it's in our marriage, but trauma is really a distressing event, and I guess to really explain it or to really help us look at it, um, we are made or we are created as human beings to be delighted in and connected to or attuned to. That is from the time that we're born or really gestating. We are meant for connection. And without it, we can't be a human. I mean, we're made for that, but we're also made for honoring, just like God is. God is we delight in Him and we honor Him. So honoring things like when there's a rupture in our relationships with people, they're repaired because that's an honoring act to do. Because we live in a sinful world. Our parents are sinful. We're going to be raised with harm. That's a given. Things are going to hurt us and harm us in this world. So how do we deal with it? Is by understanding that there's been a rupture in my relationships because if some unkind word to me when I was a kid, what was meant to be like, let's say I spilt the milk and mom comes to me and says, "You bad little girl," or "What did you do now?" That would be a trauma because it's a to like let's say a 4-year-old to a 4-year-old, that would be traumatizing because we were meant to be understood as a 4-year-old. Honey, that's okay. We all make mistakes. We all do that, and we clean it up. Help me clean it up. We'll make a game out of it, or that. But and then the child is free to make mistakes without feeling judged, rejected, or disconnected without the
Mhm.
proper repair. So when you think back, I think all of us can probably find 5, 6 events in our life where something like that happened to us. So when that rupture happens and it's not repaired, or that trauma, I will call that a betrayal. We are meant for this, and when that didn't happen, we were betrayed somehow in that connection or
Mm.
that purpose, if you will. And it went against, and it left me feeling like I don't have value, or I'm somehow not worthy or have worthwhile.
Mhm.
And so we kind of, even at 4 years old or even at 2, you might know, mom's mad at me. I know that. Or dad is angry at me and I can't fix it. So there's this sense of powerlessness that overcomes either the child or us. And I'm going to get to connect this to the betrayal trauma that we have in marriage, especially sexual betrayal. So we have this powerlessness. I can't change me. I can't redo that event, and I can't change who I am. So now I'm powerless to make a change. And so that what that does is it numbs out hope that anything's going to get better. So we have a betrayal that shatters our faith, and we become, hyper vigilant. We don't trust people. Can I really be myself? Do I really belong here? To a powerlessness that numbs out hope, to eventually just feeling shame, which is that probably the pandemic of this world is that, or at least a spiritual pandemic issue, is that we feel a lot of shame about who we are because all of this has happened. And if it happens at a young age, like for me at age 4 was my major event, and it seemed benign to a lot of people. And to me for years, it was sort of like, well, what's the big deal about that? But when I start dissecting it, I'm like, no wonder I freeze when somebody's really angry at me,
Mhm.
or no
Yeah.
wonder I sought attention in this area, a lot of it made sense.
Yeah.
So when you think about all of that, you have this powerlessness and this shame, because what shame does is it ruins love for us.
Mm.
And no longer are we able to really effectively, wholeheartedly enter into a relationship and feel confident, secure, and safe with how we can interact with people.
That's so good. I was a couple of things had stuck out from what you just said. You mentioned something about everyone about harm. What was the statement that you used?
That we all are harmed in this world.
I
Is
don't
that
know what I mean, the Bible says it,
Yeah.
but for some reason, I think that really stands out to me. We're all going to be harmed. I think a lot of us,
Mhm,
when we're going through betrayal recovery, we aim to not be harmed as much as
mhm,
we possibly can. And I think that
right.
rupture repair is a beautiful example of
Mhm,
of the necessity to grow in our resilience, to grow in post-traumatic growth. It's
that's
the
right.
it's the repair after the rupture, which will happen. The Bible says it, and Debbie said it here. It's
Yeah,
gonna happen,
it
right?
it's really true. We have had this expectation, and this gets to the betrayal trauma that, we have a troubled childhood, let's just say. Then we get married with the expectation that this is going to be so much better
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
because it's like a fresh start, but trauma's going to happen.
Yeah.
Or
And something else that sort of stuck out to me as you were speaking just now, trauma isn't always just what happens to us. Sometimes it's what doesn't happen to us.
correct. Hmm.
Neglect. Yeah.
Yeah, that just the neglect and the things that we fill in as a
Yeah,
result from that silence or from
right.
that lack of attention or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
So, Debbie, tell us, how does
Yeah.
trauma then impact our relationships, not only with
Mhm.
other people, but with ourselves as well?
Yeah. I usually will start with this idea, or Redeeming Heartache is this book that I picked up on a while back. And it says in there that trauma, more than anything else, trauma shapes our identity and our actions to find safety. So when you think of what I just said about trauma, it could be a lack of attunement or a lack of honoring, a lack of repair.
Hmm.
So what Jen said, we make things up. I made up that I don't have any value, or there's something wrong with me. And that, even at 4, you make that stuff up. And because I think then when we get older, we make excuses for the harm done. Well, my mom didn't mean it. But yet that wound, it's still a wound in us. So our body will store it up because it's part of our identity, especially the shame. But then the actions I take to try to find safety is impacted by the trauma in the fight, flight, or freeze response. Is that it's automatic. It's like who it becomes part of how I react to future harm, which makes it now post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
But your current trauma, you get married and you experience unkind words, lack of connection, less, you get in an argument, conflict, or sexual betrayal. It unearths past trauma. So all that past trauma becomes that you thought was buried back here is now unearthed.
Hmm.
So until you build that bridge from your current trauma to your past trauma to understand, no wonder, like for me, no wonder I freeze sometimes when people get angry at me and I'm like stuck, or I feel stuck at times, or no wonder I get angry at that comment or that
Hmm.
particular look, is
Hmm.
because I can't, so I have to build that bridge back. And now I can understand. It's no wonder I have fight, flight, freeze, or fawning, is because building that bridge is going to require, and that's the hard part about working with women who are in a betrayal trauma versus looking at it holistically, is that until you build that bridge and understand your style of relating, your fight, flight, freeze, or fawning,
Hmm.
you're not going to see the real war that's going on inside
Hmm.
you, because you will blame, or you will say, okay, I've got to do something about my anger. Well, the anger is there for a reason. or I don't know why it is, I just freeze and I do whatever he says, and I just want to make peace. I want peace. Your heart wants peace and calm and to be accepted, but sometimes you have to do it against your identity. It's like,
Ooh,
wait a minute, I need some boundaries here. And so that, that brings up them setting boundaries, and then they say, well, I feel guilty when I set that boundary.
mm,
So
mhm.
so your current, it requires us to kind of step away from our style of relating, which is scary. We feel
Yes.
vulnerable
Yeah.
in order to really see the real war. But that's also the problem sometimes with just looking at dealing with in a marriage, and you're working through, what do you do first? Are you going to just deal with the betrayal in this marriage and not unearth or identify past trauma and how that might be contributing to your ability to feel safe and secure right now in
Ah,
this relationship, even if he's relapsing?
mhm.
Can I still feel like the world isn't falling apart? The resilience that Jen talked about. How do I be resilient to relapse?
Yeah. Oof.
And that only comes from examining your sense of self and your own sense of value and worth.
Oh,
Mm.
I think we just found a bite clip. Bit clip,
Yeah,
bite clip.
that
I don't know what the word is. That is
we
so
found
good,
our
Debbie.
opening snippet. That was great.
Mm,
That's
Yeah.
good, Debbie. That is because
yeah.
a lot of women really truly struggle with the what do I do if he
Mhm.
relapses? And then we put all of our safety on the person who's in recovery.
Mhm.
And then we're subject to
Mhm.
their journey as a
Mm,
result. So that's so
yeah.
good.
And it is
It,
definitely a skill that has to be learned, of learning how to
yeah.
unhitch our cart from that horse. The
Yes.
Yeah.
horse being our husband's journey, our husband's
Uh-huh.
issues. We don't have to attach to that. We have
Mhm.
our own work to do, and we can be separate from that. We can come
Yeah.
alongside it, but we don't have to be a part of it. And that's
Mhm.
that is kind of like betrayal recovery class, 1.2 or something. It's you
Yeah.
got to level up there a little bit. It's
Yeah.
not the beginner
Yeah.
class.
Right.
I
Yeah.
wanted to
But
speak
yeah.
to. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
I just wanted to add a little piece about this working through your this idea of unearthing past trauma, and this is that we have to start identifying the debris that's left over from our trauma. What is it that I do, or what's blocking? In other words, I like to use a bridge. Logs get caught under a bridge and the water can't flow. I have a lot of metaphors for betrayal trauma,
Mhm.
but there's this blockage. It's like once I start taking it apart, the fear is, if I take the log out of my own eye, if I do that, I have to identify the debris that all my trauma has caused. It's not just going to be, well, if my husband didn't cheat on me, then my life and marriage is fine. But most of the complaints that come in is not just about the sex. It's about how he treats me, the lack of attunement, the he. Yeah, there's a lot of other things that go into making a relationship work other than just good sex.
Hmm.
Um, so if maybe if you want, we can talk about that in a little bit, about the debris of trauma and what that looks like, because that digs a little deeper into trauma.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to speak to, thanks, Debbie, to what Jen was saying about making things up, filling in the blanks. And when I was little, my mom and dad got divorced when I was 7, and I lived with my mom for about a year and a half. And then out of the blue, now I'm living with my dad. And my mom moved across the country. And I wasn't quite sure why that happened.
Mm,
I'm sure they told me, but it didn't make an impact on me. I don't remember. I think it was my dad was getting remarried, and they thought a whole family unit would be a good thing for me, maybe. And my mom wasn't quite in a place where she was settled in
mhm,
her life, and so I moved in with my dad, and in my brain, then I think I was 10 years old. I I believed that I was not a good girl. I was not a blessing to my mother, so I was passed on to my father. And that if I was not a blessing to my father, if I made waves, then I would go live with my aunt. No one told me that. I just thought that's probably the next place I'll go. So I felt a little bit like an orphan. I felt a little bit like maybe even a foster child that just didn't have a place to
Mhm.
put deep roots down. And nobody told me that. I ended up telling that to my dad before he passed away in 2022. And he was just heartbroken that I thought that. But again,
Mhm.
it wasn't communicated. So I filled in the
Sure.
blanks.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In the absence of data, we will make up stuff because we are our lives are a story. We have a
Mm,
beginning, a middle, and an end. And when be transformed by the renewing of your mind is going back to your beginning. And I was created valuable and good or beautiful and good. But
mhm,
the middle of my story, it became sort of broken. I forgot about that value, or it wasn't taught to me or affirmed. And I wasn't treated as if I was valued, honor, worthy of honor and attunement. And then now we come to this point where the crisis happens in our life,
mhm,
and it exposes where our faith was. It exposes who we found, how we found safety. Did we find safety in the care of the Holy Spirit or God, or did we find safety in ourselves? And it exposes all of that. Or my husband,
mhm.
as long as my husband treated me this way, I was okay. And so that's what that crisis in our trauma is about. It's like exposes where I put my faith and my trust in, and
Uh,
that's crazy. That's scary too. But
yeah.
trauma. The reason why we make up stuff and we don't, um, in the absence of data, we somehow dissociate ourselves from
Mm,
that, and we make up stuff that makes it seem better or make it seem okay. Like my
mhm,
mom might have moved away, she might have not had the capacity, so I just don't know. So that's what we have to do when we're in trauma recovery, is to go back and reclaim those events by
mhm,
putting them into context about your age, where was your mom, and what should have happened. What
mm,
should have happened to little Chris back there? I'll call her
right.
Chrissy. She should
Yes,
have
that's
received.
accurate.
She should have been sat down and explained, and or at least affirmed that we both love you,
Mhm,
and this is what's going to happen, and we love you, and we're going to do it this way. And then she would have had a better experience. So now as an adult, you can do that for yourself, is acknowledge she didn't get the care that she didn't get the care that she needed.
yes.
But
That's
it
called reparenting, right? You
Yes,
can
yes,
go back
yes, yeah,
adult, you can go back and talk to
yeah.
younger you. Well, what you just
Hmm.
said, Debbie, is such a good segue for my next question. And that
Oh.
is, what are some common signs or symptoms that someone may be
Hmm.
experiencing during trauma?
Hmm. Yeah.
How's it
What?
going to present?
Okay. So as a we're looking at it from a coaching or a therapist point of view. We're watching for dissociation when they're telling their story. Is there a sense that they are talking about the event without emotion? So what they're doing is there's that, and this is natural part of the debris of trauma, is that we learn to dissociate because feeling is very, very difficult. It's painful, and so people can be very matter of fact, but their stories are fragmented.
Mm,
I'll have gals talking about, oh yeah, back in, when I was 7 or 8, this happened, and then pretty soon in a they're in a 5-year-old. They kind of skip and skip around in their stories, but they get lost sometimes, and then we dissociate too from who we are.
yeah.
If I was for me, I'm this four-year-old girl sitting in the chair, but I don't see that at me today. I don't look at that four-year-old in the chair, but when I go back and sit in that chair, I have to go, she was 4 years old. What put her in the chair, she was 4 years old and doing what she was told to do, at least in her head. She was doing that. But then her dad got angry at her and sat her in a chair and told her to stay there. So we have to put our stories into context to make sense, and to sort of affirm to ourselves, was I did not get the repair I needed. and I made up that I was a bad kid or something. I was confused, and now I'm stuck because I don't know how to move forward. How
Yeah.
does that impact me today? But also watching when people are telling their stories of harm, especially even their betrayal traumas, there's fragmentation. They break it up, and they flood with emotion sometimes, and then they're like going on about, they might be telling you about, what it felt like to be betrayed in this marriage, but then they start, well, going back and fragmenting and telling other parts of the story or other things that their husband did besides that. And so so there's and it's also this lack of boundaries they have in their life about how they communicate emotions, which is another part of their recovery process. Is how do I communicate in a contained way? Moderation, how do I express that,
Mhm.
but the big one is isolation. That we when we examine and start looking at a person's life, they don't have any friends, or they have one friend, or
Yeah.
they've kind of, well, I don't feel like I'm connected to anybody. They're very isolated in their life. And don't have people that they have deep discussions with.
Ooh,
I do have a couple of women that go, no, I have some good friends, and, that she's able to talk to, and those people do a lot better in therapy than people who are just very isolated and alone.
Yeah.
So those three
Yeah.
things: dissociation, fragmentation, and isolation, are very signs that a person needs to do some trauma work or story work, what I would call. Yeah.
that's good. I am going to try to connect a couple of
Yeah.
dots here. Okay.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I hear a lot in the recovery journey, something I personally experienced, was a lack of my husband's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Boy, you swear you could shake that guy. You could not shake an emotion out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm realizing now as we talk, when they're talking about things and have no emotions or feelings and they're just very
Mm-hmm.
matter of fact, definitely a sign of dissociation, right? And same thing when I was trying to like wake him up to say, I'm going to leave. And he'd have like no response at all,
Mm-hmm.
disassociation,
Yeah.
which goes back and connects the dot here for me.
Mm-hmm.
That is a part of the trauma I experienced in betrayal, the lack of. It wasn't just the things he did that caused damage, it was his disassociation affected me profoundly because he could not show up in relationship. So I appreciate the context of which you put this relationally, Debbie, because even now, this
Mm-hmm.
far into the process, I still feel like I'm learning
Yeah.
about myself and about my husband, about my
Mm-hmm.
responses to him. So, Debbie,
Mm-hmm.
tell us, how can an individual begin to recognize and
Mm-hmm.
address this
Mm-hmm.
sort of trauma in their own lives?
Yeah. I think what you had just said is that if your husband is, I would, I'm going on the record of saying I think everybody's experienced betrayal trauma at this level that I've talked about. And that means that I think most addicted people as well. So you're coming in, a wife would usually present coming in, I've been betrayed in my marriage. I'm the one with betrayal trauma, but he's had betrayal trauma as well. It's just that that's part of that looking back and saying, what's the real war we are both fighting? And that's that inner war that was created relationally and patterned into us from our family of origin of what was meant to be, what didn't happen. And then how can we move forward and change that inner structure? And that's what I would do with story work, is going back in your life. Even, I think finding some stability in your marriage is important, I think, to maybe start the journey. It's like if you feel if your marriage was here you, let's say you live in a house with a basement, okay? A tornado comes in, it'll wipe the house out.
Mhm.
So you're left with just the basement. Are you going to live in the basement till the house is rebuilt? But some people say, no, I'm going to hotel. So it's sort of like, where am I going to find some sense of safety and security at least in the short term. What's going to be best for me as the wife? Let's just say I'm the trade. If I'm feeling I can't even look at him, his very presence in the room pushes all my buttons, I might need to leave for a while so that I can get my body calm, because all that trauma affects your body and all of the feelings and emotions of betrayal, if it's rejection. So I've got to get centered somehow. So I might, but if I'm got, he's watching pornography, and he said he hasn't watched it in a couple weeks, and he's in recovery, he's going to group and doing these things, I feel a little bit safer with him. Maybe staying in the basement while the house gets rebuilt's fine. We can still be together. So, because the rebuilding process is going to start with a little bit of sense of safety or stability, I would say, and especially with my emotions. Can I sit and not be triggered all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Can I calm myself down if I'm angry? We call it regulating. That's what boundary work is about. Boundaries is about protecting my triggers. Wow, those comments trigger me. Why is that? But I have to protect my value. And you doing that behavior devalues me, so I have to be away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's containing. That boundary contains me in that I can't just go off and start yelling profanities at you,
Right.
because love is kind. How do I love my enemy? If I look at you as the enemy, at the very minimum, I've got to be respectful. That's the
Wow.
minimum of love. And I can't have warm affection for you, which is at the other end, but love is on a continuum, and it's not always warm affection, walking in the woods all the time. That's not what marriage is. Marriage is a continuum. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do I respect you even though I'm really, really angry at you right now? That means I got to contain it and saying, you know what you just did really, really, I felt very disrespected when you did that. And about that, I feel really angry. That's my little
Mm-hmm.
script. When I saw you roll your eyes at me, I felt I thought he is so disrespectful. And about that, I feel really angry right now. Did you mean that? No, I didn't mean it. That's not what I meant. Okay, then don't do that again, please.
Mm-hmm.
Don't roll your eyes at me, because that's contemptuous, by the way. So it's like, So we've got to learn to communicate, and that would be an honoring thing. I want this relationship to work. We need to repair
Mm.
this breach, this breach in our relationship, or this, disconnection we have. So, using a script is one of the things I like to do. Is the first thing I teach them is that boundary words is sort of like, I too have to have boundaries in how I communicate my emotions to you, because I want
Wow.
to be respectful.
I have to say that in the recovery process, you could probably attest to this, Debbie. I think people like me
Mhm.
don't think that they don't get boundaries. I get all the boundaries. They don't get to have
Uh-huh.
any because they put themselves in this position and this is my turn to be heard and
Hmm.
say all the things that I need to say. So,
But
uh,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's
Well,
very common. Yeah.
boundaries are misunderstood. Boundaries are not what you have to do in this relationship. Boundaries is what I do. It's a self-imposed limit on what I will say and what I won't say, what I will do and what I won't do. And if I'm angry, for me, in my anger, I have been capable of saying some really mean, sarcastic things. I know what I'm tempted with, and I know what I'm vulnerable to do, and I don't want to be that person.
I like that, Debbie.
Mhm.
Boundaries are
A
what I will say,
self-imposed,
yeah, and what I
Mhm.
won't say, what I will do, and what I won't do.
I won't do,
It
right?
really has nothing to do.
Right.
Self-imposed
Yeah,
limits.
A
nice.
self-imposed limit. It's like, if when you
Mm.
told me you relapsed, I said to myself, "Oh my gosh, here we go again. He hates me. He doesn't love or care for me." I'm thinking those. And about that, I feel scared. I feel really scared that you don't love me.
Mhm.
That's what your behavior communicates to me. I Since I know that, so my boundary is, if you do that again, I'm leaving this marriage. I mean, that's extreme, by the way, but, or
Sure.
you are going to leave the house for a week, because I don't want to be around you. I only am in a relationship in a marriage where I know somebody loves and cares for me. That's my
Woo!
boundary.
It's a
I
good
only have
one.
s- I have sex with oh I don't have sex with people who or with anybody, or I don't have sex with you if I don't trust you. And
Mm.
right now I don't trust you. So it's all about what I'm going to do based on my own boundaries. What are your sexual boundaries? Where do you draw the line? In either I have the right to say when, with who, and how far I go sexually. That's my privilege. That's my boundary, you know.
Yeah.
And when we start early recovery with couples, especially if they've been abstinent for quite a while, which is probably usually the case, we start with you've got to be have it's got to be consensual when you reach out to touch your wife in the kitchen. Right now, ask for her permission, or vice versa. You
Mm.
say, I'd like to hug you, is that okay? Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I was just talking with a client last week that was talking about that very topic, and that's great. I love the ask permission until the
Yeah.
trust is rebuilt, and then the free
Yes. Hmm.
form, free flowing of the relationship can return, but it's going to take time.
But it
It
also
does,
gives
So,
us
yes.
the opportunity to reach into uh, identifying the need and then speaking it, because many of us are just so
Yes.
freaking
Hmm.
compliant
yes,
that that even being asked to be
Hmm.
touched is foreign. Like being
Yeah,
asked permission
right.
to be respected at that level is foreign. So it is an
Hmm.
exercise
Hmm.
for some of us.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
and
cut
I
you off,
think
Chris. I'm sorry.
oh no, it's all good. We're having a good conversation here. It's also in my experience anyway, is that there's a message, especially as Christian women, that it's our duty.
Mm,
Like, we may not want this, we may not want to be touched in the kitchen, but it's our duty to allow our spouse to do that. And that's not true. That is not what God intended. And that's not just a given. Permission still exists there,
yes,
Yes.
yes,
especially if
Right.
the trust has been broken.
yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
right.
think
So,
that, there's a lot of conversation that we could have about, our sexuality as Christian women, and the
ooh, that's a
whole
good
idea.
topic.
We probably should. I have a lot to say
Yeah, we'll have
about
to have
that.
a part 2
I love it. I love it. I
next.
like talking about sex too. So
I know.
Right? That's good.
yeah,
That's healthy.
Debbie's got some
Us
sass
too.
in her. She can really
Yep,
talk about the tough subjects for sure.
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So,
Hmm.
Debbie, what would
Yeah.
be some effective strategies or techniques for
Hmm.
recovering from trauma?
Yeah.
You mentioned a few in the
Hmm.
last, in this, with the last little topic
Yeah.
conversation that we had,
Yeah.
but yeah, what are some good strategies to recover from this?
I would say start if the woman is saying, "Okay, my husband's betrayed me." The first place I'd start with them is hearing their story, this betrayal story of how, what's happened. Having them get that out, like we talk about your sexual, what we would do, your sexual timeline in this marriage. What was your
Hmm.
experience with that? And if it's a coupleship too, as he does his, they do them separately. When I first met you, how did it lead to romance? What was your courtship like? How did that progress? Because then you're rebuilding on a courtship. Is like maybe we take that 3-month break from sex, but we have to go back to courting and really reestablishing the real bond that should be there. That's not there. And but I think to be realistic, it was like a tsunami came into this marriage. All her foundation is wiped away. The foundation that kept this marriage together, and usually, well, we're having sex, but now there's no sex, so there's no
Mm,
foundation. So they have to start by what's the fastest way that you can rebuild trust with each other. Well, she needs to discover what is it that created in our marriage any sense of lack of trust. Why couldn't he bring this issue to me in the beginning?
mhm.
What was it about the secrets that he was keeping that maybe he didn't feel safe enough to share with me? And vice versa with him. It's sort of like they both have to identify those kinds of things and start there making commitments that they're going to work on that particular issue. And then to once there's some stability there, that's a rebuilding of trust there, at least the fast highway of it. I'm in therapy, I'm going to group, I'm learning about addiction, I'm taking ownership of what I do, I've got accountability, I'm learning to be not non-judgmental, I'm being accountable, and I'm working from a sense of value, and I'm working on my sense of self. And following that is going back to your stories of harm. What's the debris? What is the debris that I carry into this relationship and my style of relating? I need to identify fight, flight, freeze, and fawning. If I don't, I'm going to always be reactive to that. And so I've got to learn how to deal with that and know what my temptations are, and that finding a calmness to my body.
As you're talking, Debbie, I was just reading in First Samuel, and you're talking about what's the war we're fighting, what's the origin story. You've got a trauma response. Go back to your childhood and figure out your earliest traumas, and make that connection to the trauma you're experiencing now. And there's this really curious passage. I think it's in First Samuel chapter 3, maybe 2. But Saul has been recognized by the Lord said, Samuel, Saul is going to be the king, and go find him and anoint him. So it's been announced. The people of Israel have asked for a king. They're all excited. And now they're all gathered to coronate Saul as the first king of Israel. And it's like, okay, they did the speeches, they did all the things. And now, okay, Saul, come on up. And Saul's nowhere to be found. And the Lord tells Samuel he's hiding in the baggage. It literally says he's hiding in the baggage. So this man that was, the Bible says, head and shoulders taller than any other man in all of Israel. And he is the most handsome man. He is the most glorious man. He's a fine specimen of a man, the Bible's telling us, right? And here he is hiding in the baggage. Now, I know that was literal. He was hiding amongst boxes and bags and things, supplies. But metaphorically, what baggage are we hiding in within our marriage or within our relationships? What baggage do we need to deal with? Because God called him out of the baggage to be king. And I don't know, as you were talking, I was just thinking about that. That is
Very good. Yeah.
it's what we're all called to do. So I love these steps that you're talking about, because you're talking about refragmenting. We're bringing the fragments together.
Right.
We're not isolating
Right.
anymore. We're being authentic. We're finding our safe inner circle. We're telling our story. And I love that. We talk about it all the time, that Anne Voskamp quote, that shame dies when stories are told in safe places. So having a therapist or a clinician, someone to talk to, learning, finding out, getting the data of what's happening to us.
Yeah. It's like we're a tapestry, and we've got to be unraveled before getting back to the story. Is we have a beginning, a middle. Now, how are you going to rewrite the end? You and God can rewrite the ending of this story as you unravel that tapestry that didn't get put together correctly, or honoring. And then he's going to reweave it to the design that he intended for you. But the reweaving is still that old fabric, but it's going to be reweaved. So you're still going to be you.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. I keep thinking of that song, I Am Unwritten or Unwritten. That comes to mind so often as I think about this. That to me brings so much hope, because it isn't finished. A lot of times we continue with the narrative that we're currently experiencing as if this is the end of the story, forgetting that there is still a story that is continuing, and the power we have to engage in that story and write a different ending. I have a quick, maybe not so quick, but I have a question regarding stories. And during this process, you share some of your story with some people, and you share aspects of your story with others, or maybe you share all of your story with some people. When we are looking to connect with others, or let's just say we are supporting someone in their story. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's scary to share the details. We're not sure how it's going to be received.
Mhm.
Um, Dan and I had shared stuff in the beginning, and we had friends that ran the other way, or we had like my mom who wasn't able to handle the heaviness of my story. But yet these are people that loved us. They were people who wanted to support us.
Mhm.
So, could you speak, Debbie, to those who want to support people that are going through betrayal trauma and addiction recovery? Um, I think of these dear hearts, my mom and these specific friends who wanted to be there, but they didn't know how to handle the story. Do you have
Mhm.
any insight on how someone can support those who are dealing with betrayal trauma and addiction
Mhm.
recovery?
Yeah. I think if you have a story to tell and you have like a friend that you think first say, you know what, I'd like to, is it okay if I share with you my story? And then to add in there, how would you like them to respond? Because what happens when you're listening to somebody if you're not prepared, or if you're a very anxious person there, or like I know my mom, I wouldn't necessarily talk to her about a lot of things because she wants to fix it. And so it's like, okay, I don't need you to fix it, but I just need to really talk about that. And that's really being more discerning about who I share my story with, but it's also respectful to that other person. They might not have the capacity, because when you're empathetic, you're able to sit and listen to somebody without judgment. So if you feel anxious when somebody's talking about it and you're thinking, oh, what should I say next? What do they want from me? You're in anxiety, so you're not going to be the best listener. So usually it's sort of like, okay, I just, when I'm telling Harry, my husband, some personal things or something that's vulnerable, I just want him to listen. I don't want him to make comment. And he finds that I can just start talking about it. Then I'm like, oh, then I go to, I'm able, because he hears it all. Where before I would not say anything because he used to want to fix it, or he'd, you know, change the narrative a little bit. So letting people know how you would like them to respond, or, and offering, if at any time you start feeling anxious, to just say, well, wait, let's take a breather. So giving them that opportunity to kind of stop the story and let's take a breath. That's a lot. So.
Wow,
Mhm.
that's very empowering to let
Mhm.
someone know exactly what you're needing, and then
Mhm.
also giving them the permission if it's too much to
Yeah.
say, "Hey,
Yeah.
Yes. I
yeah, I
love
didn't
it.
learn that skill set until
Well,
afterward."
one of the things that I've learned from you, Jen, is you'll call and say, "Okay, I need to talk about something. I don't want you to fix it. I just want to be known."
Well, yeah, but that's
That's
after 10
so
years of therapy.
yes, but it works. The
But it
therapy
works.
works. And that's such a
Right.
great takeaway. And I love what you said
Mhm.
there too, Debbie, about asking permission, because sometimes our stories of trauma, most of the times, trauma is heavy,
Mhm.
and there might be some situations where people don't want to know this, or they don't have the capacity to hold that. Maybe they have their
Yeah.
own trauma they're dealing with, or
Yeah.
maybe they don't have the skills, necessary to hold that story with us. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
asking permission, I got something
Mm.
going on, this is, do you want to know this, may I share this with you, is such a beautiful
Right.
thing, to not burden other people,
Right.
as we're especially in the beginning of healing from any kind of trauma, as we're identifying our inner circle. We might have really important people that we love and that we've done life with and we've got these
Yeah.
great histories with, but they might not be our person in the healing
Mhm.
process.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we in our own woundedness, sometimes we misinterpret another person's um behavior. We make up, well, they didn't call me back. I called them and asked them, and they didn't call me back. So they interpret that as a rejection. They perceive
Yeah,
it as a rejection, and they take offense to it. When really you went, then fast forward a week or two, the person calls back and they said, well, I had to put my mother in a nursing home. So
right?
they find the real truth out. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Great
Yeah.
point.
Yes.
Well, this has been
Yes.
such a great
Yeah,
conversation,
it
and
has.
definitely we would love to invite you back for another
Yeah.
one
Yay.
because this was not enough time. But in closing for this conversation, Debbie, is there a word of encouragement you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah. Take the time and to honor yourself and discover your story. Kind of, I I think it's an honoring thing to do, to attune to ourselves and understand what, where did I not get attuned to, and that I am worthy of that, or I am valuable enough to be attuned to. And that's where that inner healing with God's going to come from as well, is when you open yourself up to the wounds that, for me, that little 4-year-old, and then what did that 4-year-old do to get attention? What did she do to fit in? What did she make up about herself? And fast forward to, why did that my 4-year-old, why did she hate her personality so much? Why did she want to be this person and not who God intended to be? And the shame of that. So when we connect and make those appropriate uh, contextual discoveries about ourselves, we're able to be more authentic in our relationships and set the boundaries about how people treat us. I, you know, I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody that calls me names or implies that I'm stupid. But I got to be less judgmental about that and discover, what did they really mean. So it helps the relationship move forward when you can be authentic and boundaried in your relationships.
And the only way we can really do that is to show up for ourselves.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Instead of waiting for others to show up for us,
Yeah.
because maybe they don't have the capacity to, but to show up well for ourselves,
Yeah.
to advocate for ourselves, to know ourselves on that level, to be curious
Mhm.
about ourselves, all these things that equip
Yeah.
us to show up well in our lives, which
Mhm.
will honestly, truly expedite the healing process and get us that much closer to the post-traumatic growth. People all the time
Yes.
say, I just want to press fast forward. Okay. I'm like, okay, here's how you do it. And they
Right.
don't like that
Yes.
answer.
Yeah. It's
But this is how you do it.
I think one of the ITAP presenters says it's like couples come in and they want to go to the moon. And then he's like, okay, but do you have a spaceship? No. Oh, how do you build one? Oh, I don't know. And then it's like, oh, wait, I have to take calculus and I have to know math. And then so we have to start at the beginning, and
Yeah.
that beginning is starting with who we are in this relationship, not what was
Yeah.
done to me, but who am I?
And that's the bow on the conversation right there. That was beautiful. Who am
You
I?
are
And
worth it.
that is
Yeah.
one of the most powerful things that we can do, is be
Mhm.
able to articulate your identity. And that's great
Yes.
work to pursue in this healing process. So
It is.
on that note, Debbie, thank you so
Yeah.
much for being a
Yes.
guest on our podcast. This
You're
was
welcome. It
delightful,
was fun being
informative.
here.
Yeah.
Good. It was fun. We've enjoyed it very much. I can tell because the listeners can't see us, but Jen and I have been ear to ear smiles the whole time.
Yeah. My
So,
face hurts. Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
It was
So
fun.
good. I'm so glad. So thank you, listeners, for tuning in and being a part of our podcast community. Your support is valuable, and we're here to serve you. And we'd love to hear from you. If you want to contact Jen and I, we've got an email address. It's thebrtpodcast@gmail.com. We've got an Instagram. It's the.brt.podcast. And yeah, there's lots of ways to get a hold of us, but we'd love to hear from you. And if you have ideas on guests you'd like us to invite, if you have questions you'd like to have answered, etc., please reach out. But on that note, everyone, have a great life until we meet again here
Yes.
on the Betrayal Recovery Transformation Podcast.
Okay. We'll see you here soon.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Betrayal Recovery Transformation Podcast with your hosts, Chris Rocha and Jen Howie. We hope you've been helped and encouraged. If you value the content we shared today, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps others find the show. Need personalized guidance? Please contact Chris or Jen for transformative coaching. This episode has been brought to you by HealingWithTheHowies.com, WatermarkCoach.com, and with the support of Pure Life Alliance Ministries.